I think people need to remember that there was a time when the class tuning was so off, dude, that we had to wait a whole patch for some buffs. And now we're getting buffs and nerfs 5 times before the patch even releases. For anybody who hasn't kept up with class tunings, there's been a whole bunch of class tuning, and now we finally have the last, hopefully, buffs and nerfs before 10.1. I don't think there's gonna be any more buffs, and it's like, when are they gonna do it? There's no more time. It's like 2 days away, 3 days away from for the patch to drop. But there are some tunings, and this is why, by the way, nerds, when we do tier lists and any kind of predictions, this is what we are talking about. How good does it feel to tell you, we told you so? They're gonna do buffs and nerfs even a couple of days before the patch, possibly even after the patch goes live. People going apeshit in comments in our tier list videos and our rankings and predictions like, oh, but the numbers, but what about the numbers? Listen, all right, let's go get into the nerfs before I explode. So let's see what the blue post says. To address several points of overperformance and underperformance, we will deploy tuning and balance adjustments to many classes along with the Embers of Neltharion patch maintenance next week. So these will happen on reset. We're also deploying these changes to the Embers of Neltharion PTR today for testing. Please note that these adjustments are being made to abilities as they have been designed/tuned in the Embers of Neltharion patch, and some may not apply to how spells are tuned in the live game, 10.07. Some of the adjustments below are to the PTR tuning of the tier items coming with Aberys, the Shadow Crucible raid. Now, what this means is that if you're playing right now in 10.07 and you're watching this video and you're looking at your HAVOC and your Demon's Bite, your Demon's Bite doing 8% more damage at 10.1 might not be the Demon's Bite that you are doing, because before, like, the PTR version of HAVOC has some tuning as well, you know, as an example, has some tuning as well from the 10.07. So take the 10.07 HAVOC, it's gone through changes, tier set adjustments, class buffs, tuning, and blah, 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 and that's how it functions on the PTR. And on top of that, to fix all of that, these are the tuning that we have, not for just HAVOC, right, but for all specs. So if you're looking at these, take them also with a grain of salt. So that's how you should judge these buffs and nerfs, or maybe not judge them at all. Just wait until the patch launches, until you have the gear, and then see how the class feels. This is what this is. So first of all, HAVOC has a bunch of buffs. Demon's Bite damage increased by 8%. Demon Blades damage increased by 8%, most likely to keep in tune if you're playing Demon's Blades. I don't know what HAVOC plays now. Fell Blade damage increased by 8%. Chaos Strike and Annihilation damage increased by 8%. Serrated Glaive, the talent debuff duration increased to 15 seconds and now retains up to 30 additional duration when refreshed was 10 seconds. So I assume this is just Pandemic being applied to it. I imagine that it didn't have Pandemic before. Fixed an issue that prevented Chaos Theory's talent bonus to crit chance from affecting offhand hits of Chaos Strike and Annihilation. So essentially, these are all single target buffs, which are pretty good. Obviously, HAVOC has kind of a history of being a little bit weaker on the single target. We know the message. We have seen it on other specs, which, funny enough, they will also be here. Druid, Feral. All abilities damage increased by 5%. Feral is getting a 5% overall damage buff across the board. This is pretty good, considering that when they do overall buffs, they usually keep it on the 3% range. This being 5%, obviously is better. And, you know, if you're looking at it and you're thinking, oh, 5%, wow, great, 5%, sure. But when you're always looking, because the same person that will say that probably will be the same person that will look at logs and see Feral doing 100k on Terras, and then, I don't know, DEMONOLOGY doing 106k on Terras. Well, now, with these 5%, essentially, that same Feral will do 105k, getting that closer and closer to the top end of the spectrum. So, this is definitely good. I don't know if it's enough. I don't know if Feral was that weak, but obviously, buffs are buffs. I don't think anybody's gonna complain. RESTO also got some changes to the tier set. 2-step bonus now increases Life Bloom and Rejuvenation Healing by 10%, was 12, so a nerf a little bit to the 2-set. Again, we don't really know what this means. I mean, I know people have done some simming, some theory crafting and all of that, and that's all fair and well, but I think we should probably reserve opinions until we actually loot this and actually use it. I think Resto Druid is also secretly really good, but we'll have to see. Evoker, Preservation. The 4-set bonus will now grant Essence Rush after 4 Empower spell casts instead of 3. This is slightly a nerf, although it's also a gameplay change. I am not up to date with how good the 4 set is. I'm not talking about raw numbers, but mostly talking about how good it feels. How often you would be able to use that Essence Rush properly, as opposed to being on 4 Empower spells or 3 Empower spells. So, yeah. Hunter, Survival, Aberrant Shadow Crucible, Force bonus now reduces the cooldown of Wildfire Bomb by 1 second per 30 focus spent, was per 25 focus, so you have overall less cooldown reduction on Wildfire Bomb, and Kill Command increases the damage of your next Wildfire Bomb by 40%, was 75%! Okay, I think I've said my thoughts on Survival Hunter for way too many times. I don't necessarily have a problem with the numbers that Survival. Obviously, I played Survival quite a bit. It's one of my most played alts in the first season. In keys, done some of the highest keys with Survival. I think it does really good damage. It does not do like the uncapped damage that it was doing in Shadowlands, even pre the tier set of Sepulchre. But my problem with Survival is basically design. Whatever the tier set does, I mean, whatever. They're nerfing Wildfire Bomb because I've seen some numbers. I think Vesprol was playing. I think I've seen him do some plus 15s, and he was destroying the meters. So possibly this has to do something with that. We'll see how this turns out in the actual game, because Survival numbers realistically doesn't really have bad numbers. If you look at Teros, it's one of the best single target specs in the game. It has been for almost the entire patch. Its AoE kind of suffered because probably it's compared to Boomkin AoE, to Shadow Priest AoE, to Fire Mage AoE, to Destroy Warlock AoE, to Unholy Decay AoE, which are all scaling really high. But it feels like Survival Hunter AoE kind of hits a ceiling way quicker than a lot of other specs. But that's all fine and dandy. We'll see how Survival Hunters performed. I will try to be a little bit more generous with my criticism for Survival, because I think I've probably went a little bit too much lately. Fire Mage, ignite damage reduced by 6%. And we also have some dev notes. The most recent buffs of fire were slightly more than intended. We are going to reduce the damage of ignite to keep a relatively similar gain in single target while reducing the effectiveness of the buffs in AoE. Now, we know that Fire Mage is doing pretty good damage. I think this is similar to Survival. I think that Fire Mage's damage is not necessarily the issue. It's design, right? Fire Mages, do you agree? Because this is all I'm hearing. This design of Fire Mage. Obviously, people don't particularly like that I pretty much play the same spec again. I feel like Fire Mages, even with the design, whether it's good or bad, I feel like Fire Mages really have to work hard for the damage, and they really rely on power infusion. This is from my observation. It could be wrong, but all of the logs that we have studied for our tier lists that involve Fire Mages, all the Fire Mages that are keeping up or beating most of the specs in the game, all of them pretty much use Power Infusion. I don't know how Fire Mages plays without Power Infusion. I know how Devastation plays without Power Infusion, and it plays shit. I don't know how to feel about Ignite's damage. On one hand, Ignite is a pretty cool concept. I feel like it's really fun to play with. I personally enjoy Ignite. However, the fact that it completely locks out Flame Strike, which I think is still the issue, because Ignite is just so much better, that's a design issue. If you design Fire Mage that its best AoE is to not take its AoE ability, Flame Strike, the most iconic AoE ability that Fire Mage has, that's probably a design issue. I don't know if reducing the Ignite damage is gonna solve the issue, or if they need to buff Flame Strike also. I guess we'll have to see, but I would imagine if any of these will come up eventually, it will be addressed within maybe, hopefully, the first couple of weeks of 10.1. Windwalker, you monks who are crying constantly that you don't have enough single target damage. Once again, like this happens a bunch of times a patch, you're getting single target buffs. And I cannot imagine why Windwalker's still not doing damage. I'm not saying that's you guys' fault. I'm saying that all I'm seeing every time is Windwalker's single target buffs. Tiger Palm, the Rising Sun Kick, Blackout Kick, damage increased. Well, Tiger Palm and Rising Sun Kick by 15%, Blackout Kick by 8%. Probably because Blackout Kick can also cleave. Maybe that's why they don't really want to buff it too much. But Rising Sun Kick is probably really good. 50% extra damage is good. Obviously, this is only 2 of the abilities that Windwalker Monk uses in single target. This does not mean that your single target is increased by 15%. Also, this does not mean that all of these are going to not be enough, because once again, Windwalker has received, to my knowledge, it's been a long time, man. The 10.1 PTR has been up for like a couple of months now. I cannot keep track of all the buffs. But Windwalker from 10.07 to 10.1 has received a bunch of buffs, and now you also have these buffs to single target. I know there might have been some AoE nerfs as well. I'm glad that they're getting buffs. If it's still not enough, I hope that they still address it still. But then again, you know, it's the same for a lot of other specs. If you have a spec that cranks in AoE, it's likely not going to crank in single target also. However, when it comes to a raid, I've said this multiple times, feeling that the boss needs, because the boss needs to die, like, it doesn't matter how many ads you have. We haven't had fights in a long time where killing the ads is the most important thing to do, and if you don't have enough AoE, you wipe the boss. Pretty much everybody has enough AoE for all of the fights, but not everybody has enough single target for all of the fights. So this is probably the issue with Windwalker. This is probably the issue that I've seen with Boomy in Season 1, Shadow Priest, been through this before. Paladin, boy, Paladins. All right, holy. Now this comes on the back of us doing the healer tier list prediction that was launched yesterday. So, and some of these points we made in our healer prediction, which might make it so that Holy Paladin might be a little bit better than we predicted. So first of all, the 2-step bonus now increases the critical healing of Holy Shock by 60% from 15. Now, that's a lot. That's it's quite a buff. It's quite a buff. Light's Hammer healing increased by 60%. Holy Prism healing increased by 150%. Holy Prism damage increased by 100%. Now, Light's Hammer and Holy Prism obviously tie really well into the tier set. Their numbers are mega poop. So these, don't look at these buffs and things like, oh my god, it's gonna be OP. I mean, obviously it's gonna be better. And I think I don't know who wrote the Holy Paladin tier set feedback. I know that pretty much the Holy Paladin community is pretty on board with this, but they did ask for these throughput numbers to Holy Prism. I think similar to Light's Hammer, but I'm not, maybe Light's Hammer 60% is better than, I don't know. These buffs weren't necessarily, were definitely asked for. I'm glad that the devs listened to. I hope this is enough to bring Holy back, because Holy, although I'm not the biggest fan of Holy Paladin, I feel like it and Mistweaver kind of need a little bit more love. Protection. You overpowered nerds. Let's see what they're doing. Ages of Light specialization passive. Stamina bonus reduced to 30% was 35%, and armor bonus reduced to 10% was 15%. So overall tankiness reduced. I think this probably makes a lot of sense when you look at Prop Paladin performance. Righteous Protector cooldown reduction is now 2 seconds, was 3 seconds. Again, uptime for defensive nerf. Sentinel's health increase per stack is now 1%, was 2%. Okay. This nerfs a Sentinel buff, HP buff by half, which is pretty big. So they double nerfed Sentinel. I don't know how this feels. This seems like a lot, but it might not be. This still feels like a lot. So overall, you'll have 30% less cooldown reduction for your Avenging Wrath, aka Sentinel. And Sentinel will also have its buff halved. It's still not enough to bring it down. Okay, well, I guess we'll have to see. The buffs, the nerfs seem pretty big, but maybe well, Prop Paladin scales way higher in 10.1 than it does now. So maybe this will all come down again. Once again, although these might seem big or might not, or might seem small, we still have to, you know, take it for a drive and see how it plays out. Rogue fixed an issue that prevented Night Stalker's damage bonus from applying to its intended circumstance. Wait a minute, isn't this big? Wasn't this a big issue for Rogue? I'm not a main Rogue, but this feels like it was a big issue. All right. Assassination, the Rogue spec that has seriously suffered way too much in the last 2 expansions, I feel. All ability damage increased by 5%. Overall 5%, yes. On top of that, Mutilate damage increased by 5%. Envenom damage increased by 5%. Shift damage increased by 20%. Kingsbane damage increased by 12%. These all feel like single target stuff though. And I think Assassination struggles in AoE. I mean, this is good. I feel like Assassination might have really good single targets, possibly. That's my feeling. But isn't the main issue with Assassination its AoE? But it could be just its AoE design, but probably also numbers. Outlaw. Dispatch damage increased by 5%. Between the eyes damage increased by 20%. This is funny because they nerfed Between the Eyes 2 weeks ago, right? I remember Between the Eyes being nerfed and now they're rebuffing it. So, okay, if anything, this is a good indication that they're keeping their eyes on buffs and nerfs. Whenever they're over buffing or over nerfing, they'll essentially address it. Well, didn't they nerf Between the Eyes like 2 weeks ago? Or was that just the tier set effect on Between the Eyes? It was one of the two. Either way, Between the Eyes got some level of nerf and now it's getting a level of buff back, right? So this is good. If you're disgruntled that, oh, I'm getting nerfed, duh. Well, listen, they're keeping their eyes on it, right? So I think it's good. I think people need to remember that there was a time when the class tuning was so off, dude, that we had to wait a whole patch for some buffs. And now we're getting buffs and nerfs 5 times before the patch even releases. Summarily dispatched the talent now increases dispatch damage by 6% per stack to a maximum of 30, was 5% to a maximum of 25. Okay, so this patch now has quite a bit. Wait, this patch is the single target finisher, right? Now, I know Outlaw was pretty good, but lost a lot of steam over the course of this patch, or lost some steam, let's say. Oh, we have dev notes. While the buff will provide the correctly updated bonus, the tooltip for the base talent will be changed in a future update. Okay. Subtlety. Shadow Strike damage increased by 10%, Eviscerate damage increased by 6%. I cannot really comment on sub, because obviously sub is doing really well right now. I don't know how it's supposed to perform in 10.1. I would imagine that the buffs are probably made to, you know, keep in tune. Well, I guess we'll see. If anything, if they're too much, they're probably going to be railed down, although I don't know. I know sub cranks in AoE. It's okay in single target. I was never really impressed by sub single target. I think, didn't Outlaw do more? All right, Elemental. Oof. The 2-step bonus now grants 1 stack of Stormkeeper, was 2 stacks. Okay, so nerfed. Dev knows the tooltip for the 2-step bonus will be updated to reflect the change. Okay, so nothing else. Then the 4-set bonus now only grants 50% increased Maelstrom, down from 75. Again, these seem like big nerfs. They might be big nerfs. But once again, they might be needed nerfs. So I haven't played with the Elemental tier set yet, although it was one of the tier sets that I most wanted to try out. I guess I'm glad I didn't get attached to the previous interaction of it, but it still sounds like a pretty good tier set, so we'll have to see. Resto. The 2-step bonus Sidewater ceiling is increased by 30%. This is good. Not necessarily that Resto needs buffs, but more so that the tier set didn't really provide enough power in terms of healing. To my knowledge, hence this was the point that we discussed in our tier list prediction. But although I still feel like Restoration Shaman is a very, very solid healer baseline, and it doesn't really need its tier set to function, which is good. Warlock, oh boy, they've nerfed my baby. Demonology received some powerful single target additions to their talent tree in 10.07. We're making these adjustments after observing that their throughput is a bit higher than what was originally intended, and that these talents have overshadowed other talent choices. We'll continue to monitor Demonology along with Affliction and Destruction, and appreciate the community's continued feedback. I hope Affliction gets some, man! Affliction needs to get it! Affliction needs to get its buffs too. Reign of Tyranny now increased the damage of Demonic Tyrant by 40%, was 50%. It got buffed. It outscaled Grand Warlock's design, and now it's getting railed in. I guess I'm fine, because this also pairs really well with Grimoire. Immutable Hatred now increases the damage of Legion Strike by 100%, down from 120%. Again, I don't really mind these too much, because I like the concept of Nether Portal more. And Nether Portal, you would either play Nether Portal or Immutable Hatred. So, but this is my bias. However, I think it's pretty fair to assume that Demo was stated to be one of the best DPS picks in the new raid. Not necessarily the best single target. I think that still goes to Destro. Maybe even I don't know if there's maybe I don't know if Warlock might just be, at least now in The Sims, the best single target DPS in the game in 10.1. But that could change. So I am fine with some nerfs if they're going to rail us in. I would hope that these would come as buffs as well to Affliction. So I guess we'll see. Last but not least, Warrior. Arms. All ability damage increased by 4%. Auto attack damage increased by 12%. Ooh, I like that. I don't know how much that matters. It probably doesn't matter that much. But I like to see big weapon swings, man. That's like a core fantasy, you know, going back all the way to classic. Hitting with a weapon. Slamming it hard. That wide damage, dude. That wide damage. I'm glad that they brought it back in Shadowlands, and I'm glad that they buffing it one more time now. Fury, 4% buff across the board. Auto attack damage increased by 4%. All right, so pretty much similar stuff. Probably more towards, I mean, I would imagine auto attack is just single target. I'm guessing they needed some buffs. They decided to keep him on auto attack damage, which I actually don't mind. I kind of find it cool that you swing your weapon and you still do relevant damage, as opposed to, well, if I don't use this ability, I don't do damage. I think this is better. So these are the buffs and nerfs that we have for the 10.1 going into at least preseason. If there are serious issues with any of the specs, I would imagine that we're gonna see more tuning before the season starts, so that people can, you know, properly plan their mains and their progression through the raid and through pushing keys. I hope that happens. If not, that will definitely happen. I am happy that they're so aggressive with tuning, that they're even doing tuning like a couple of days after they've done tuning and a couple of days before the patch releases. I think this is pretty cool. Props to devs. I hope at the very least that I'm speaking for a lot of people when we say, is like, I'm glad that you guys are taking a spec balance a lot more seriously, so that people don't feel bad for wanting to play a spec that's just not there, or being forced to play a spec because that spec is just way too strong. For instance, there might be people that are just forced to play Demo even though they like Affliction, because Affliction does almost, you know, it's less, and that is what it is.
I've been loving it then, I still love it now. Still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. Getting better every day, let me show you how. Cause still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. It's getting harder to stay, but at the end of the day, it's a guilty pleasure, so just log in and play. Whether it's classical retail, I'ma do a /bow. Still, I play WoW.